is very intimate. We're all just right over here.
How we doing, guys? We all asleep? Still alive?
We love the energy.
We love DIDs. We love DAOs. Yes?
Test.
Excellent.
The question was, you down with DID?
Woo!
Yeah,
Yes.
so who knows what DID means? Anybody in the audience? Probably one person I know, two people. Decentralized identity.
Hands.
Cool. Great, that means we have a really good audience for what we're going to talk about.
Love it.
So maybe a good starting point is, what is decentralized identity? Anybody want to take that?
I would be happy to. What's
Great.
up, guys?
And introductions, yeah. Introductions.
Yes. My name's Evin. I lead an awesome team called Disco, and we are building identity for the metaverse so that you can be the shining center of the party and you can reflect yourself to the world in whatever way you choose. And I think that decentralized identity means the ability to own and control your name in Web3 and all of the data about what you've been up to, and your ability to exercise control, over that information about yourself so that you can enjoy personalized experiences, first in the Web3 digital ecosystem, but very soon in physical spaces as well. So DID means owning yourself.
Very cool. Introductions.
I love it. Hey guys, I'm Lauren Feld. I'm the head of growth at 3Box Labs. We're the team behind Ceramic Network. Hopefully you've heard about us after today. A lot of big announcements. I think you did a pretty good job of explaining decentralized identity. I usually think about it as like a very high level, just mapping user data to an identifier, like being able to track all of your online digital presence to yourself at like a high level. Obviously, decentralized identity is like pretty charged. There's so many different ways to think about it. So we could take it in a lot of different directions, but that's my high level.
Cool. And I'm Humpty Calderon, head of community at Ontology and core contributor over at Orange Protocol. And yeah, in terms of decentralized identity, the ownership of that digital identity in Web3, I think everyone here is contributing into that space. And with Orange, we're working on owning the reputation, your activity, leveraging that for creating better onboarding experiences into DAOs and just generally Web3. So with that said, I find the title interesting. So I think maybe we could start with that and tackling it. You doxed me. So when we're talking about decentralized identity, is that necessarily doxing you? Like what are we talking about there? Like, what is it that we're revealing? What is it that we are keeping private?
So when we think about decentralized identity, our identity in Web3, I think probably where most of your minds are going to go is to NFTs and on-chain transactions, the public actions that we do in Web3 that make up our expression of self. But a lot of those actions can be pretty doxing. Things like your ENS name, if it's got your real name on it, non-transferable NFTs that contain information about you, or even public data that describes actions you've been up to in the real world. And so I personally think that public blockchains are a terrible place for personally identifiable information. And so if you want to have a decentralized identity and you don't want to dox yourself, the best way to do that is to take that data off the blockchain and store it in a way that you own and you control. You decide who gets to see it. But if your DID, if your decentralized identity is composed largely of on-chain activities that include information about you, that means every person on Earth with an internet connection and even the guys in space can also access this information. So when we think about doxing, releasing your public data to a broad variety of people so they can, interact with you in ways that you perhaps don't want, the answer to this, in my opinion, is autonomy and consent, allowing users to decide who gets to see their data and when, as opposed to publicizing it to the galaxy by default.
Yeah, it's cool. So there's a thing called verifiable credentials, right? I know we can fall really deep in this rabbit hole with terminology, and we're not trying to bore you here, so we're trying to keep this really, lively. So in terms of verifiable credentials, though, the difference between the way that you store that information is that it is privacy preserving, right? So to your point with NFTs, sure, it's fun to have that information publicly available, but it is exactly that, publicly available. So in terms of the technology that's available for retaining that privacy and control of that information, the decentralized identity VCs are the ones that would help you with that. So I guess the next question, because we are at DAODenver, we are talking to people that are maybe parts of DAOs. what are some of the experiences that we've seen in the DAO space or challenges that decentralized identity can potentially solve?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a couple of different things here. I think one thing obviously that we've seen that's really pervasive in the Web3 space is like the rise of more pseudonymous identities, right? And people not wanting to reveal their real world identity, which I think is pretty cool. There's a lot of reasons behind that we can go into. And I know we had talked a little bit before this about, there's from the outside, that's one reason that a lot of people are very skeptical of Web3, right? Like they have this idea that it's very anonymous, it's hard to track, and that results in all kinds of like fraud and bad actors in the space. But that's not necessarily true. And I think it's really important to break down the difference between being anonymous and being reputationless, right? Because you can actually still build reputation around a pseudonymous account. And so having an identifier that's not your real world name, it's some other string of characters or like some other, nickname that you want to go by in the web, which is awesome. But you can still build up reputation on that over time. And so I think what is really important in the DAO space right now is we're kind of at a tipping point where a lot of DAOs are starting to think about being much more discreet about who they actually onboard into their communities. So a lot of them, they've kind of gotten bloated with a bunch of people that want to contribute, but maybe aren't contributing in a really valuable way. And so I think reputation is so important there, right? Of like actually being able to figure out who do we want to onboard and what have they done in other ecosystems. And we can talk about this a little bit more, but DIDs are a really great framework to start to build that kind of like cross-chain, cross-ecosystem reputation.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I can also, hop in a little bit. So I love DAOs, and to preface my comments in a moment, I am a canonical signer of a couple DAOs, Inc. DAO and Dow Jones. One's an investment DAO, the other one we have matching tattoos. So there's a broad variety of activities you can do together. But at the end of the day, all of the DAOs that I am part of, even the ones that I'm just a member of, are really just group chats with bank accounts. Because you cannot trustlessly solve more interesting coordination problems right now. If all I know about you is your Ethereum address, let's say, the only thing I can learn about you is how much money you have, which means that the only kind of coordination problems we can solve together are treasury allocations. And the only kind of governance we can enjoy, functionally is plutocracy. Do I have more tokens? Do you have more tokens? Or have, perhaps as a proxy, have I held mine longer than you? So if we want to solve more interesting or complex coordination problems, we need to have more information about one another. Exactly as Lauren was just saying, what do you know? What have you accomplished before? Have you thrown a party for another DAO? Have you written articles for another DAO? What kind of aptitude are you bringing to the table so that you can decide, if we're going to develop a product, let's make sure that we're prioritizing the votes of the product builders and not just the richest people in the room. Because a product designed by the richest people in the room is probably not going to be a great product.
Well, I think you touch on 2 points there, and one of them is the fair and inclusive way that we onboard and facilitate these experiences to everyone, in particular those that don't have capital, right? So in terms of solving problems that have to do with capital, the one thing that I've found in DAOs, at least the ones that I'm a member of, is that there are these people that hold large amounts of a token, but they're inactive when it comes to governance of a DAO. And so when they're trying to activate this community and pass forward proposals, they're nowhere to be found. They're not actively participating in that ecosystem, right? They're just holding a token for whatever purposes. And so when it comes to reputation, to identity, to be able to facilitate, instead of just a token voting mechanism, but a reputation voting mechanism, definitely empowers not just the individual beyond just holding a bunch of tokens, but also empowers the DAO, because they're able to then connect in a real way, in a meaningful way with their community. And then whenever they need to make these changes, these people are the most active, the ones that are really kind of moving forward and creating impact in the space.
Yeah, just to add to that quickly, I think it's super interesting, like the contribution problem that a lot of organizations are seeing right now. I'm very active in Index Coop DAO, and that's something we're really struggling with right now. And I think we've seen this come to life a lot in the last couple of weeks, especially with the ENS Brantley situation that happened. There was a ton of public outcry. Like everyone wanted to kind of jump on the boat on Twitter, but when it actually came to the community taking a stance to move him and like actually take measures to move him away from having this like major stake of governance in the ENS community, there were very few people that actually moved to cast their votes, right? And to actually like have a say of these conversations that were happening on proposals and forums. And so I think it's really interesting, like how I think reputation is a really great way to start to incentivize people to contribute more, because we can start to show reputation over time across ecosystems. And so maybe to put it more granularly or like more tactically, if I'm in Index Coop now and I want to onboard new members or contributors to my pod, and I see that through your DID, your like activity in other communities and forums, and you're not very active from a governance perspective, maybe you're not the kind of contributor that I want to onboard into my community. So I think that reputation can be a very powerful and identity, obviously, a very powerful lever in terms of actually starting to activate those like right now inactive contributor bases.
Yeah, I wonder if we can dig into that a little bit, because I'd be curious to hear how you think, or what type of information or data or activity that we want to surface when it comes to being able to have those cross DAO bridges or relationships at the individual level, right? So you're talking about like when you're trying to onboard folks over at Index Coop or Co-op?
Index Coop. I call it Coop. I mean, everyone in it calls it the Coop because we have nests. You know, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
So when you're trying to onboard these folks over at Index Coop, like what is it? What type of activity? What type of reputation are we looking to find of these individuals that would be valuable members of that community?
Yeah. And sorry, I mean, do you want to chime in? I feel like I'm going along.
No,
here.
go for it. Go for it. Go off.
Yeah, I would just say it will definitely depend on the community, right? Like, what do you think is valuable in your community? I mean, there's a couple of different things you can look at that we're seeing projects right now using Ceramic for to do this, because we provide, obviously, a decentralized data store that's focused on sovereign data, so storing it with the user, and all centered around this DID framework. So, you know, we might want to see like what kinds of comments that they have on other proposals. What does their voting history look like? It can start to get very political, right? Like I can see what kinds of things are they voting for and against in other communities. And like, I don't know if that's, I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing, right? But I can start to use that as a basis for whether or not I want to allow you into my community. I can see skills and credentials that you've earned in other communities, or even bringing in places, not just from other DAOs, but looking at things like Rabbit Hole or Figment Learn, for example. They're actually both using Ceramic right now to create user profiles and store credentials. So now as a DAO, I can see maybe you don't have experience in another DAO contributing, but you've done all these amazing quests on Rabbit Hole. You clearly have like an aptitude for Web3. You're interested and you're going the extra mile. So I want to onboard you, right? So it's not just like other DAOs and communities. It's being able to port any data related to, you know, you as a person and porting that with you in whatever community you want to join.
I completely agree. I think, you know, proof of participation helps us understand whether someone is going to be down for the adventure when they come to our party, or are they going to sit on the sidelines and just enjoy the free drinks. And so we want, you know, good contributors who are going to be substantial in the way that they participate and meaningful in the way that they show up. But what I want, perhaps selfishly, is like, I would love a proof of chill. Like, can I get a verifiable credential? Or rather, when I think about curating communities, you want people who are value aligned. You want people who are kind to each other.
Who is the arbiter of chillness? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I think we're going to need like a TCR or something for that. But in all seriousness, though, like negative reputation is a real challenge, because Web3 can be all, you know, wag me and fun and games until someone starts acting like a jerk. And we started to see that, you know, because we have assets that can be wholly owned and controlled in a sovereign way. You can't just claw back a bunch of tokens from someone because you don't like something that they said on the internet. And so being able to, you know, qualitatively even start to identify, how do we signal proof of membership in good standing in a community? I think in the future, it is highly unlikely that people will carry around their own credentials. I'm not going to present credentials that say, like, Lauren thinks I'm a jerk. But I think that the absence of positive reputation will start to be the signal that we look for. So in DAOs, you know, thinking about the human dynamics there, I think it'll be really valuable and exciting for us to start to applaud and you know, support, congratulate in the form of these credentials, continued showing up in the way that Lauren described, continued voting, kindness, respect, upholding the values of the DAO, bringing in people who are value aligned, helping to deal with difficult situations in a way that maintains the continuity of the community. And I think that these kinds of contributions, these non-financial, off-chain human coordination contributions, are just as critical to a DAO as the capital that they have in their treasury.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we keep bringing up these bad actors, right? I wonder, maybe not wholly within the scope of what we're trying to talk about, but maybe it is. How do we feel like, okay, let me pose this question a little differently, or maybe start with an introduction. One of the challenges that I've seen DAOs really attack and focus on is onboarding mechanisms, right? But the one thing that I haven't seen worked on a lot is offboarding mechanisms. And so I wonder, how does digital identity, decentralized identity, reputation play into how we offboard people from a DAO as well? Because to the point we're talking about Brantley, there was obviously something that needed to be done. Maybe we couldn't activate the community to participate in that vote, right? But is there a way to leverage identity, reputation to do that? So I'm curious if we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think that it's really interesting, and the whole community, like we had a team call where we talked about that ENS situation in terms of there's so much thought right now in the space, just everything being new, of like the first half, right? Like onboarding is the focus. And like now we're getting to the point where we're like, oh crap, like there's the second stage we still have to focus on. So I think it's new is what I'm saying, and people are figuring it out. But I think it could be a really interesting mechanism. Like, I don't know, I'd be curious, Evan, what you think. Like, is it like a VC or like something that you issue that's like a proof of firing or something that is like sticks with them? Maybe in that case, actually having something like an NFT, like where I know this is sensitive to you, but something that is like non-transferable, right? That shows proof to someone that you link to this identifier that's publicly verifiable. I'm not sure exactly how it would look, but I definitely think that, reputation goes both ways, in both a positive context and negative.
I completely agree with your assessment there, Lauren, of our love for the first half. I have never heard anyone outside of like Moloch DAO and the rage quit capability, which I think is an awesome way to, anticipate that exit. But like, with social tokens, for example, no one's ever talked about how to sunset a social token when the, musician that it represents has turned 95 and is, retiring. But when we think about the sort of the magic of identity when it comes to the exit from a community, I think verifiable credentials, which are, these little trustless units of data that can be revoked or set to expire, I think they're the perfect vessel. So imagine you come and you join Dow Jones, you're an awesome member, you're loving it, and upon joining, we give you a verifiable credential that attests to your membership in good standing. And then let's say something goes awry, you, commit securities fraud and, like set my house on fire, and you can't be part of my DAO anymore. And so as a canonical signer of the DAO, I'll get my other signers together and we can revoke that credential indicating membership in good standing. And so that sort of standing can be private by default, but the absence of positive reputation can be a really strong signal as well, especially when we think about offboarding. But we also need a lot more than just pulling someone's membership card, because the sort of processing and healing of a community after a disruptive event is just as critical as the day-to-day activities.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'm taking away from what you said there was there's a real human element to that, because in real life, we have reputation too. Right. And I mean, maybe a little easier to kind of recognize that reputation because we're not necessarily so pseudonymous. Like I know you as a person. There's that reputation that comes with you, and you can earn that. You could also lose that reputation. So there's something to be said about decaying reputation and just generally overall losing that reputation as well. Yeah. So anything else we want to talk about in terms of like digital identity and DAOs? I know we had a few questions in the channel that we were all in. If y'all give me a minute, I'll pull those up. But anything else we should be talking about right now?
Well, I feel like we could go on this for hours, which is maybe dangerous with Mike. I mean, I guess the only thing I'll just touch on that you just brought up is like the real world identity versus like, again, the pseudonymous identities that people are building in Web3. And I actually think I feel like I'm very much being a proponent of this in this panel, but I actually think that they're very cool and powerful. Like a lot of people I think are really afraid of them, even in the space. In some ways, we definitely embrace like some of the better known characters, but I think what's really cool about them is, one, I think a lot of people are actually feel much more comfortable and they're more incentivized to participate when they actually have some other like identifier to be behind that's not linked to a real world identity. Two, I think it's really helpful when we're thinking about like underrepresented groups and minorities in Web3 that maybe feel like being able to not show their real identity in every part of who they are will allow them to like, operate in a a more open and inclusive space, which I think is really powerful. And 3, I think that a lot of times what we're seeing in Web3, especially in the DAO community, people want to operate in multiple different ecosystems, and identity is very contextual. And they might actually want to have very different identities in different ecosystems and communities. And that's very difficult to do, to your point, if it's to a real world identity, right? Like, you guys know my face. And when I'm up on this panel, like, I am representing Ceramic and Index Cube and all the things I've affiliated myself with, because you see my face there, you see my name there. But if I have different identifiers for every community I'm in, I can have completely different personas in all of those communities, which is really powerful, right? Like, and there's pros and cons of that. But I think when we think about this decentralized world and people wanting to show different facets of themselves in different ways, that's like a very powerful new system. And again, you can still build up reputation behind each of them.
All right. Well, are we out of time?
Yeah, well, unfortunately,
All right.
we are out of time, but we really appreciate you guys coming up here and helping.
Absolutely.
We have a hand for our